State of the wild card. Arm Layden and myself, Jack McMullen, are ready to break down the American League wild card race. And then Ryan Finkelstein, our managing editor on the written side, also the host of Locked On Mets, is going to come on to talk about the National League wild card race. And we'll talk about it off the top with him, but he essentially pitched him coming on the Just Baseball show this week. He said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm ready to talk." So we cashed it in, I think, within 24 hours of his offering of services. But I do have something off the top of the show that I want to run by Aram. As always, we're brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks, and today is Tuesday, September 24th. We do have something that you just texted me about that I forgot to mention before we started recording. David Bell was fired. The manager of the Cincinnati Reds is no longer the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. What say you, Aram Layden? I saw the reports that Nick Kroll mentioned that there were philosophical differences between
Mhm.
David Bell and the front office. I like hearing that because when you hear that from an executive, that essentially means the manager wants to still kind of be the manager and not just the guy that writes down the lineup that was sent to him via email at 8 a.m.
Yeah, I think, and that also is kind of one of those easy, just like slap the auto answer on and just say, hey, we have philosophical differences,
Yeah.
like Mike Schilt as well. Because like, think about the Cardinals. That's a front office that isn't as much, I think, of. I think they get involved, but it's not as much of like, hey, they're going to make the lineup card for you, at least as far as I understand.
Versus San Diego, I think that front office is incredibly involved, and Preller wants his hands on like everything, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I might be wrong. Like fans will always have a better feel for that. So let us know in the comments. But I also feel like it is kind of that auto-generated explanation as to why you wanted to let a guy go. I think there's a few aspects of this firing that make it really fascinating because one, David Bell got extended at the end of or like amidst the hot streak
Yeah.
of the summer last year, where the Reds were looking like one of the more fun and up and coming and exciting young teams in baseball. It gives me a little bit of a sense of impulsivity from Crawl, right? Like where
Mhm.
if you're extending your manager and then through a hot streak before like you've really seen how this whole team's going to settle in over a
No doubt.
longer stretch, and I would wait another year or something like that just to figure it out. On top of that, you're now going to fire him after a really bad second half. I think there's a couple of different schools of thought here. Is it Crawl being a little impulsive, or did things sour that much that fast? And I do kind of lean towards the latter. I think it's a little bit of both, but I think it is pretty damning that right after that extension, it's gotten to the point where the Reds have decided, hey, we need to go in another direction. And this is still a mostly young clubhouse. And I think that there may be a level of maybe a disconnect between the clubhouse and Bell at this point because it seemed like the team really just kind of checked out in the second half. I'm not saying in terms of like effort on the field, but it didn't seem like there was that same level of intensity and I just think willingness to win and overall buy-in that you saw from the team in the second half last year. And I understand that there were injuries and challenges and things like that come along, but that happens for a lot of teams. And it just seems like there is a non-baseball maybe side of this that really I think is added into the fold here where I just don't know if they felt as though David Bell would be the best leader of these young men for where they want to be next year. And I know this is a team that can still be really solid next year, has a good core. I don't want to blame it all on David Bell. They're 76 and 81 as we're talking about this, and it's not like that's a complete and utter disaster
No, it's not a
considering
disaster. The
cons-
Red season has not been a disaster. There are far worse seasons relative to expectations. I would use the D word, the disaster word, for St. Louis before I used it for Cincinnati.
I agree. So, I kind of walk around and just like my head, I kind of feel like I'm going in circles, but I do feel like something had to have happened. It had to have gotten really bad really quickly over the last several months to
Yeah.
get to this point after an extension, because that extension, even if you regret it, it still buys more time before you're ultimately going to make that decision to fire. And I think it's also interesting that they do it without just letting him finish out the season here a little bit and just go from there. It seemed like there was a message almost that wanted to be sent. So I think it just is more damning on how bad things must have gotten behind closed doors there, whether it's between the front office, whether it's between the manager and team, whether it's all of the above. It just seems like they felt very positive that Bell needed to go.
Yeah. So the other aspect of the timing that I think is pretty important to identify is the Cincinnati Reds in essence get a head start on the managerial search. Like the White Sox got the biggest head start, right? They've had a month now essentially to go through the process of IDing the finalists for their managerial opening. The Reds now beat everybody else that is going to fire their manager. Who else is going to fire their manager? I have no idea. It's interesting because there are two guys in that division that have gotten extensions, and I think just based on what I've read and like reading the tea leaves, seem like they are on a somewhat hot seat, and that's Derek Shelton in Pittsburgh, and that's Ali Marmol in St. Louis. Like they both got extensions. Seeing Cincinnati fire a manager that they just extended is pretty interesting. And that may, that may swing the pendulum in the front office's favor in St. Louis and in Pittsburgh to possibly think about a change like that. But the way that I look at the timing is very similar to the timing of the coaching carousel in college football, where if you wait too long, you take yourself out of contention for the top head coach hires. You know what I mean? It's like Kalen DeBoer was only going to stay on the market for so long. So when Saban retired, they got that done in like 48 hours. I'm just saying, like, season ends for Skip Schumacher this weekend. You have the opportunity to pitch yourself to Skip Schumacher for a week before anybody else can. And right now, it's essentially, hey, do I want to go to the White Sox or the Reds? Because I'm sure. And if neither offers a managerial position to Skip Schumacher, the Reds or the White Sox, I think they're making a serious mistake there. I think the Reds are looking at this and saying, hey, we have the chance to get the best available manager on the market. Why don't we do that with this timing?
Yeah, and that part makes a lot of sense in terms of doing it a few games early here, and it seems like Skip will be one of the main targets for a lot of
He
teams.
has to be
And
the it guy. Yeah.
yeah, and I think he should be a guy that the Marlins ultimately would want to hold on to, but that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I think it's also a bit of Crawl probably saying, hey, this year didn't go as I wanted it to either. So if we can reload, adjust for next year, and things look better, it also looks better on Crawl and in his position, who was promoted to president of baseball operations from just a
Yeah.
general manager gig at the end of last year as well. So it's probably more of him saying, "Hey, I want to kind of clean this up. I'm the president of baseball operations. I want it, from top to bottom, kind of my people, and go from there." I know he technically did bring in, I would say, if the timeline correct, or it may have been just before Crawl actually that David Bell would have been there. I'm trying to think about the timeline there because Bell, it's 6 seasons now. Crawl would have been the GM in 2018. So I guess it's around the same time.
They came in at the
Um,
same time.
yeah, so I would a Reds fan would know that better, but regardless, I think it was clear that they want to try this to push this thing forward. This young core, there's a lot of good pieces here. This team could be very solid as soon as next year, and it just felt like maybe David Bell, I think, had a little bit of the past kind of baked into that, and it seems like they kind of want a fresh start, and I totally understand that in a lot of ways. And I didn't always love the way that he went about his business. To be honest, there were some times where I was a little bit put off by some of the things that they were doing and some of the ways that I think David Bell addressed some of the things in the past when they go through tough stretches. I don't think it was as much of a thing now. I thought they handled it relatively well, but
Yeah.
it seems like there's just time for a new face up there, and I'm interested to see what direction they go. But I think Skip would be the perfect kind of leader of a young team that I think will
Yeah.
have some higher expectations.
David Bell hired on October 21st, 2018. Kroll was hired as GM on May 10th, 2018. So Kroll did hire David Bell. So there you go. That has been the manager in Nick Kroll's tenure in Cincinnati, and now he's going to look for somebody else. I've got a topic that I want to bring up with you because you have been the leader on this show about the opposition to, I think, the majority. And
I'm nervous to know what this is.
we saw a hell of a start from Skenes that we talked about on the weekend roundup. So I just want to ask you, are you still thinking Jackson Merrill should be the National League Rookie of the Year?
It's funny. I was thinking about this as my head hit the pillow last night. So I'm glad I had a little bit more time to think about this before we just broached the conversation because I wouldn't have been ready. I'm struggling on a couple fronts here. One, is the fact that, and I know that numbers are just the numbers, and you can have a similar conversation of like, so Tani the MVP, if it was 49-49 instead of 50-50, like
Right.
these arbitrary numbers shouldn't just solidify something. There's something about an ERA getting below 2 that makes it
Hmm.
real tough to say this guy's not the rookie of the year. And that's the part that is very, very difficult. This is where I'm glad I don't have a vote at this point to try to decide where I line up on this thing. I still think that the precedent is there. Like you've seen it where it just we always seem to lean towards the position player. And what Jackson Merrill has just continued to do is really hard to ignore. I wish there was like a perfectly laid out criteria of what the rookie of the year is. Is it the most valuable rookie? Is it the most impressive rookie?
Right.
Is it what is it? Because I think what Skenes has done has been more impressive, I
Uh-huh.
guess, statistically. But I would argue that Jackson Merrill has been significantly more important to his team because he's playing every single day.
Yeah.
He is playing one of the more important positions at an extremely high level. And then you can, whether you think that they are controllable or not, what he has done this year in the clutch has been integral to their success.
Yeah.
So that's where I struggle. But I still think I lean Jackson Merrill. If Paul Skeens was at 150, 160 innings, you'd have my attention. It's 130 still, and he's going to get one more start in there. It's going to be 137.
Right.
I still think my vote goes to Jackson Merrill.
Okay. Rebuttal from me, I guess, is we just haven't ever seen a rookie season like this on the mound. And if
I
you,
mean, Jose Fernandez was pretty darn close.
he was pretty darn close. Did he win Rookie of the Year?
Jose Fernandez, yes, I believe he did.
I'm just thinking like 130 innings at a sub two. And we were, talking about this on yesterday's show too. Since Paul Skeens debuted on May 11th, he leads Major League Baseball in ERA by 2/10 of a run. He's better than Sale, he's better than Skubal, and he is third in Major League Baseball in punchouts in that stretch. I think only behind Sale and Skubal. So like you could make the argument that Skeens at a 1.99 has been, and Peter did make the argument, the best pitcher in baseball. Um, in that regard, like you can't do the Fernando Valenzuela game because that was when complete games were normal. And like not normal, but
Yeah.
it was like a good day at the office was a complete game. Now it's Skeens was never going to do it this year. Um, I think Jose Fernandez is the closest thing. And I think when you look at the Harris Strider thing, this was brought up via text in that just baseball group. Um, Merrill has been better than Harris, but Skeens has been better than Strider was at that
Yeah.
stretch. So
Yeah.
I don't know, like team performance. I think that Merrill has been more integral to the San Diego Padres, and that's no indictment on Skeens. It's just like the Pirates around him are not good enough to have him be in that valuable conversation because that franchise is not winning enough games this year for him to be considered a valuable like leverage piece. Having said that, it's hard to find a guy through 22 starts, and I know that there are historical landmarks that he has hit that no other rookie pitcher has hit. It's hard to find a guy through like this number of starts that has been as dominant. So, like if you're not going to reward the essentially unprecedented, when do you ever reward it?
Yeah. No, and that's the conversation. And so what's interesting is Jose, wins rookie of the year. He also finishes third in Cy Young voting.
Yeah, and Skeens could very well finish third in Cy Young voting this year.
Does he though? Like that's my question. Because do you know where Paul Skeens ranks in terms of innings pitched this year? And I hate to do this, but like
Yeah,
I'm just curious how much this may matter to voters. This is less about me too. This is more about just what
right.
I think may happen.
You also know
Um,
why I think it frustrates you and me and everybody else. It was beyond his control. Like he
oh,
could
I
have
know.
gone
Oh,
200 innings here.
trust me. Yeah, I totally agree. And this is why it's tough because you have it separated by leagues. I'd almost rather you have one ultimate rookie of the year as a hitter and one as a pitcher
Yeah,
and just roll with that. I know Walker had talked about that a little bit last year on the show, just
yeah,
because I think you should just have one for both leagues and have it be, you know, a position player and a hitter, or even just doing it for both leagues. Just it's just so apples to oranges. But when you look at who's thrown 130 innings or more, and I know innings pitched are way down overall, but Paul Skeens is 88th in innings pitched, this year. So it's just in terms of the usage, like there just hasn't been as much opportunity for him to hit a wall or not hit a wall or do those things. And I know he's finished so strong now that it really is impressive. But I think with what Merrill's done on an every single day basis, being there since opening day and just grinding out the 162, it just makes it hard for me to go in another direction. But if he goes back out there again, he's gonna get one more start, right? We'll get one
Yeah,
more
he'll
Paul
get one
Skeens
more
start.
start in New
He goes
York
out
against
there,
the Yankees.
yeah, if he goes out there and shoves in New York, that just might be the statement that gets him, and he can get it closer to 140 innings. But Jackson Merrill is going to play 157 games,
Yeah.
158 games this
That
year.
that is the hang up for me. That's why I'm not just saying Skeens is it. I do think Skeens, like, in essence, I think he got it on lock after that start in Cincinnati. But the reason I'm not saying like it's a wrap, this isn't even a conversation, it isn't making the show, is because Merrill has played 100 and he'll play 160 games this year.
That's, and I mean, we're talking about a guy that's been the third best center fielder in the sport
Yeah.
probably this year.
Yeah.
That's where it's tough for me. That's where I have a really, really tough time going any other direction. And it's just been better and better and better for Merrill as the season's progressed here. So he's going to be among one of the most used players in
Hmm.
Major League Baseball. He's going to be, I think, among the top 15 in F WAR if you look at it in that department as well. And just playing such good defense and doing everything like that. I still think I lean towards the guy that's playing every single freaking day,
Yeah.
but I would not fault anybody for going towards the pitcher that put together a season that we've really, like you said, pretty much never seen from a rookie. Jose Fernandez was a 2.19 ERA, but it was 172 and 2/3 innings
Yeah.
that helped him check in at number three in Cy Young voting. But I mean, a 1.99 is pretty damn outrageous. But if he gives up 3 runs or 2 runs in the next start and it's 2.05 or 2.04,
Right.
then what?
Good point. We don't know. So we'll see.
I think this next start could really like
You think
I
so?
was that's what I settled on last night before I went to sleep too, is like it sounds really stupid, but this next start could pretty much make or break the I think rookie of the year case for Skeens. And if you think about it being razor thin, he's made 22 starts. This is his 23rd start. If it's razor thin, you think there's a margin of what 4 or 5% difference between these guys, even if
Yeah.
you think it's one or the other. That's one more start. So I think it really could just come down to this final start from Skeens. And if he shoves in New York, that might be the icing on the cake for him.
And I can totally see that. My thought was if he shoves in New York, he can like wrap this thing up. And it's like, oh, how many first place votes is Merrill going to get? Out of 30, is he going to get 2 first place votes? If he doesn't, then I think that's a real conversation. We could see that like 16-14 split one way or the other. And I have no idea which way it's going to go, but I'm really excited for that. I want to talk about the state of the American League wild card quick. And this is going to be the shorter one of the two because Fink needs to absolutely beat us over the head with Mets propaganda and vitriol towards the Atlanta Braves and all that. But the American League wild card, as it stands right now, Baltimore has the top spot. They are 4 games clear. Baltimore is going to be in. Detroit and Kansas City share the third spot. Essentially, they are wild cards 2 and 3. Minnesota is a game back. Seattle is 2 back. And then you got Boston and Tampa that are 4 back. Boston and Tampa with 6 games to go. I'm factoring you out. Detroit, Kansas City, Minnesota, Seattle. And note Minnesota is a game back and Seattle is 2 back. If you had to pick two of them, who are they?
Nobody wants it, man.
Nobody wants it. Can I tell you, I eulogized the Minnesota Twins yesterday. I was like, they're done, man. They're just not. They're
Oh,
not
you
playing
can't
to a
do this.
postseason.
This is your American League Brewers.
I know. And it's been going on since we were project the plate in March of 2021. But the Minnesota Twins, dude, like I flip them on or I watch a condensed game or just like watch some media availability. I'm like, there's just nothing here right now. I hate their vibes, to be honest with you, right now.
I
And it's probably going to bite me in the ass, but like, I do not like the vibes right now.
I don't either. I mean, but they do have a 3 game set against the Marlins at home, which
Mhm.
always helps. Um, but I'm with you. I think they're the team that seems the most, I think, fragile right now. I mean, the Royals are in a free fall, even more, I think, incredibly than what you're seeing from, I think, the Twins. But the Twins are going to get 3 games against the Marlins and 3 games against the Orioles, which the Orioles actually are a pretty good team to play right now. Speaking of
Right.
free falls, it's just amazing to see all of these teams just hit an absolute wall here in the American League. So the Mariners are actually playing a little bit better of late. The offense has been better, and it's just you wonder if it's too little, too late for them, or if this is something that they can kind of sneak their way back into. But similarly with them, like they've got 3 with the Astros, which won't be easy, and then they close out with 3 at home against the A's. So I don't even know because I just can't fathom how awful this free fall has been for the Royals and for even the Twins to a degree.
Yeah.
I Part of me wants to say that the Mariners can just grab this last spot
Part of me
because
is thinking that too.
I think you always say, oh, 2 games is a lot to make up with 6 left, but not when everybody else is losing.
Right.
I think the Mariners grabbed this last spot.
They have essentially one more turn through the best starting rotation in Major League Baseball to grab a final spot. And Julio Rodriguez has been awesome in the month of
Yes,
September. They have a lot of guys that are ticking up right now. I could absolutely see that. Are you penciling the Tigers in?
think so.
At
Yeah,
this point, I am. I see
I am.
two teams on the upswing and two teams on a firm downswing, like you mentioned. They hit a wall. And I'm going to go with the two teams on the upswing. I think Detroit grabs that second wild card spot, and I think that Seattle puts together a little bit of that 2-game comeback over the final week, and I think they grab that spot. We're looking at Kansas City and Minnesota out by a game or half a game, and that sucks for a division that I think a lot of people like. It was gaining steam in early September. It's like, wow, is this the best division in baseball, if not for the worst team of the modern era? I don't think the answer was yes, ever.
Well, it became closer to no, even if it was yes, when the Twins, they don't add anybody.
Yeah.
Their only addition was Trevor Richards, who they sent down at
Yeah.
the deadline. Like, how do you not add to this team at
I don't
all?
know.
At all? How do you not bolster the bullpen? How do you not just or anything? Just do a little bit. So I think that was a huge part of this thing. And of course, I mean the Tigers. It's not like they were buying, but they got hot and it worked out. There's always going to be a team like that. But what's interesting now is the Royals they did add, but we always talked about like, okay, how long can this magic continue with how top heavy the lineup can be? Not that it would continue enough to make the playoffs. I still think they can, right? They've got 3 against the Nationals and 3 against the Braves, but all 6 of those games to wind down the season here are on the road. And you know how much better Kansas City swings it at home. So that side of it's going to be interesting. They're 49 and 30 or 45 and 36 at home. The Royals are 37 and 38 on the road. So they're going to have to look a little bit better on the road. These games are still going to matter clearly for the Braves, which we're going to talk about at the end of this episode. So it's going to be intense there too. I think the Tigers with their momentum, like you said, they've got it, and I think they're going to be able to hold on to that spot. And then it's just going to be a matter of I think who really ends up slowing down the most. And I think with the Mariners kind of being on that somewhat of an upswing, I
Yeah.
think that they could just outlast everybody else if they play 500 ball. These other teams might just lose all the way down below them.
Can you put together a postseason rotation for the Detroit Tigers? What's it going to look like?
Oh my gosh, the Detroit Tigers.
I know. So Skubal game one.
Yeah, that part's done. That's
Is it
nice.
is it Kader Montero game two?
No, it can't be.
Is it Brant Herter game two?
No, it can't. It can't be. Is it? It's got to be Reese Olson.
Okay. Olson working his way back from injury and like building up again. He's back and he's looked pretty decent since coming off the shelf and he looked good on rehab when I saw him. Granted, it was short. So Olson game two, then Kader
And then is it
Montero
like a
game three.
Herder Montero? Like,
It might be a Bo Brisky opener to Herter as the long man.
yeah,
We're just talking getting there. We're not talking winning. We're just talking getting there.
that that's gonna be what it looks like. I think.
Man, that's a doozy.
Oh,
Just get there. Gritty
just
Tigers.
get there.
Just get there.
Tigers fans deserve it. They absolutely deserve it. I would love to see it. It's just so funny how we talk about pitching and how integral that is, especially in the playoffs. And yeah, the Tigers are ahead, and we can't even figure out the 3 heads that are
What?
going to go there. And then the Mariners, it's like You could have a 5-man playoff rotation.
Well, and we mentioned, this is since August 11th when that hot stretch started for the Tigers, they have the best record in Major League Baseball. They have the best staff ERA in Major League Baseball. And like we can't figure out the postseason rotation for the team that for the last month and a half has had the best staff ERA in
It
Major League
it's
Baseball.
got to be Brant Herter / Kyler Montero and let the bullpen go crazy.
Why not, man? Get nuts. All right, we're going to have Fink on in a moment. But before that, I do want to tell you about our friends at GameTime because it is all about live events. We know that some of the best memories are made at a marquee sporting event, your favorite band performing in your city, or a comedian that just cracks you up that comes in. I recently got into Bargatze. He's so funny. I don't know why it took me that long to get to Nate Bargatze, but Game Time can help you out if Nate Bargatze is in town with their new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even faster and easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Simple process. Open up an event, you get 3 tiers of deals fed to you. Super, amazing, great. You could go super, you can go amazing. Like, why would you go great when you have super and amazing there? You can essentially curate your deal to fit your priorities on Game Time Picks. Go check out Game Time Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater. List goes on. Panoramic seat views before checkout are there. You also get their lowest price guarantee, which means if you find a better deal in the same section and row, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. And Game Time covers your purchases with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code JUSTBASEBALL, all caps, one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code.
Just baseball, JUSTBASEBALL.
That was the fastest one for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it, Aram?
Game time.
It's also time for Ryan Finkelstein. Ryan Finkelstein is here to tell us why the Mets are actually better than the best record in baseball over the last however many weeks here. Ryan Finkelstein is the managing editor of justbaseball.com. They do tremendous work editorially. Ryan, Leo Morgenstern, Eric Truden, and the rest of the awesome team. Fink is also the host of Locked On Mets. This has been the best 2 week stretch for you since.
I don't know, June, July. It's been a great season, man. I
It
mean,
has.
you
Oh,
said,
After the rock bottom thing, it's been a great season,
wait,
right?
yeah,
which rock bottom?
The
there was the
second,
one rock bottom. There was the one rock
no, there
bottom
were
in
like
May.
4 rock bottoms.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of them, but I mean, that there
There was
was,
two verified Gary Cohen rock bottoms.
okay,
No.
okay.
So
Okay.
But all before June. And I will say, since May 30th, which is after the infamous game where Jorge Lopez lodged his glove into the stands, the Mets have the best record in baseball, over 101 games. So it's not just the best record the last 2 weeks. It's 101 games. It's 4 months of the best record in baseball. So I just want to make sure we got all the facts straight there.
So how have they done that over those
that's
101
what I was
games?
going to ask.
How have they done that? Well, obviously you start with Francisco Lindor, but I think aside from just near MVP campaign from Lindor, the starting pitching does not get nearly enough credit. And honestly, that's where I'd like to start because it's been pretty much now 4 months going where you've had at least four guys for the most part that have been consistently really solid. Sean Manaea has become a legitimate ace for this year. Luis Severino's been really good. David Peterson, breakout season. Jose Quintana still doing it somehow. So it's really been the starting rotation that keeps them in games. And then they just have some ignitability to that lineup. You know, the way Mark Vientos has added that extra power threat to the lineup at third base. You still have, of course, even in years where they're not their career best, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo doing things, Lindor, obviously, and then just timely hits and, and just kind of Mets magic. Sometimes you just have those years where it's like, oh, yeah, they just find a way to win some games. And that's been what this team has been for a while now.
I mean, the magic side is definitely a big part of this thing where like you call up Luis Angel Acuna to fill in
Yeah.
for Francisco Lindor, and it was really just at the time it's like, okay, well, there's the best option that they have right now. We're going to ignore the 69 WRC plus in AAA, and sure enough, he I think has more extra base hits in a week than he had in a month in AAA. I mean, like
Yeah.
that just you file that under the magic department, right? And like what is going to happen when Lindor now that he's back, now that you have some other infielders, like are they going to carry Luis Angel if they make the playoffs all the way through? Like are they just going to ride this hot hand?
I don't think he'll be playing all the way through if Lindor is available, but he's certainly going to have a spot on the bench because Jeff McNeil went down, so there was already that spot available, and he gives you like great versatility for the last man on your bench to be able to play center, short, second. The crazy thing about Acuna is he was of 81 qualified hitters in the International League, he was 78th in OPS. And then he comes up and it's just I did a show today titled like Angels in the Infield for the Mets because it's just insane what they've gotten from Iglesias this or excuse me, Acuna this past week. Iglesias too, though, all year. And then
Incredible.
he's on a 16 game hitting streak. And since Lindor went out, 7 of his 8 starts in the leadoff spot, he's had multi-hit games. So that's just been insane. Mark Vientos, like I said, it's just outsized production from infielders that you're just not expecting this. I'd even say, as far as the Magic department, last night in the Mets Phillies game, when Bryson Stott steals third, Francisco Alvarez, horrible decision, trying to throw him out, basically pegs third base. Any other Mets team I've watched in the past, that ball would have trickled into the outfield and the time run would have scored. It popped up and just dropped right in Mark Vientos' lap. That's just one of those things where it's luck, it's magic, whatever you want to call it,
Divine
but
intervention. Yeah.
there you go. It makes you feel like, yeah, the Mets, they're gonna find their way into the playoffs, and I honestly think they can make a run.
Mm.
That's the interesting part too, because I was going to ask you about that, but I wanted to at least follow up on Jose Iglesias because I think this is one of the more. It might just be more of a me thing, but I think this is one of the more fascinating storylines in Major League Baseball this year.
Yeah.
One, on the baseball side, and there's enough on the baseball side too. Like you don't even need to mention about his Billboard hit, debuting at number one. That adds a really funny dynamic to it. But this is a 34-year-old who is having the best year of his career. Has there been any discussion? Like, was there something that clicked for him? Like, was there something that happened that made Iglesias have this career renaissance at 34? Or was it maybe the fact that, he's enjoying life outside of baseball and not playing with as much pressure and knowing that he has a career as a music star after this and playing free? Like, this guy has a 130 WRC plus, something like that, 135. Like, I just don't understand how you can go from he's been a good player, but how at 34 years old, all of a sudden you become, having the best year of your career while also dropping a top hit on the Billboard charts.
There was some talk about when JD Martinez was in Syracuse for a little bit, getting him on his weighted ball program and just trying to, hit the ball a little bit harder. But honestly, I think more than that, Jose Iglesias is the type of player that Major League Baseball has sort of moved on from, right? The great defender, the guy who hits for an average but doesn't always get on base at a great clip. But what we've seen this year is a guy that has said it. He took playing in the big leagues for granted and not playing the big leagues all of last year. He said he'll never do that again. This guy has gotten so many infield hits where he just plays at, 100 all times. And I think that's really it. He just brought an edge to this team, a joy to this team. And yeah, some of the hits are just fortunate where it's just, I mean, how is he getting all these infield hits? But also it's the hustle. It's just great bat to ball skills this year where he's just really controlling the zone well. And he's had some at bats late in games against closers where he's just been unbelievable. I mean, 2 outs, runners in scoring position for a long time. I think it still holds. He's hitting over 400. So it's just at a certain point, you just have to say, like, this guy's locked in a way he probably hasn't been his entire career. And it is a career year at 34.
So, in terms of the template that Jose Iglesias fits, you're right. Like, that is the kind of guy that baseball has turned away from in the last half decade, I'd say.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think is best about baseball is you have a bunch of different ways to play this game in a good way. And Jose Iglesias is playing this game in a good way, a lot different than the way Kyle Schwarber is playing this game in a good way, which is a lot different than Dansby Swanson is playing the game in a contested good way right now. It's really interesting to see how all of this has unfolded for the New York Mets, especially considering some of the star power has not been at a level that you were hoping that it would be. Like Francisco Alvarez has had an underwhelming year, and we talked about the power zap and Eric Chavez's points on that about a month ago. Pete Alonso, counting numbers look fine. he's not had a good year by Pete Alonso's standards by any stretch. And it's kind of shocking because it is a contract year for Pete Alonso. Do you feel like this week presents an opportunity for an Alvarez, for an Alonso, for, a Brandon Nimmo to really tick up and say, hey, you know what? Postseason, like, we can be stars when we get to that month of October.
Yeah, I think it's for at one point during this past week where it seemed like Lindor was going to be able to come back at 100%. I was making the case that this could have been a little bit of a blessing in disguise because it sort of forced those other guys to have to step up. You couldn't just defer to Lindor to get the big hit. Other guys had to come through, and we've seen it, particularly with Nimmo and Alvarez this past week. I mean, Alvarez, he's more than doubled his home run total, I feel like, over the past 2, 3 weeks, hit 5 home runs, I think, in his last, I don't know, 11, 12 games. So all of a sudden, Alvarez has gotten back to that powerful swing that we know he has. And he's one of those guys that I look at and say, that's why the Mets can make a deep run because you have him batting eighth and we know he can turn a game around. Nimmo has really found his swing again, and that's been huge. Pete Alonso, it's just been a strange season. Now that Lindor, he said yesterday, if he plays this year, he's not going to play pain free. So all of a sudden, I can't really say, oh, it's a blessing in disguise because you're not going to get Francisco Lindor back to himself. But what I will say is it has allowed some of these other guys to really take more ownership over what the Mets have done. And it was a 6-1 homestand, and all of those guys got big hits.
Yeah.
I don't mean to skew this a little bit more negative here. Actually, I kind of do. But
yeah, you totally mean it.
You're 2 games up, the Mets are. And they've got, a 3-game set against the Braves coming up here.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about the playoffs. We're talking about all these good things. And they're very much the favorites to be able to get there and do that. But I mean, it's not necessarily going to be easy because this series, which has probably been one of the biggest upcoming series, one of the biggest series we've probably seen for the Mets in some time here. They have a chance to give it right back to the Braves. And I know the Braves haven't looked great, but at the same time, the Braves are going to roll out Spencer Schwellenbach, who's been one of the better young pitchers in baseball over the last several months. Then they've got the Cy Young favorite here in Chris Sale going in game 2. I know his velo was down a little bit, but still. And then you got Max Fried in game 3. Like, those are the 3 guys that you want. If this was a playoff series, it wouldn't be in that order, but those are the 3 guys getting the ball. We talked about the Mets arms. Those guys have been great as well. So I'm not trying to say that it's some totally lopsided situation here, but the point is, like, the Mets are going to have to beat some pretty good arms here without one of your best players available consistently. So how do you feel going into that? And I mean, this is a spot here where the Braves have been there. They're tried. They've been tested, and they can control their own destiny still somehow through all of this BS. Like, does that not make Mets fans a little bit nervous?
I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a little bit nervous, right? This very much mirrors 2022, where these two teams were neck and neck for the division. I think the Mets had a 3-game lead, if I'm not mistaken. The tiebreaker was on the line. It was either a 3-game or it might have been a 2-game lead, and they got swept in Atlanta. So, yeah, history is kind of repeating itself, but that Mets team was fading. The Braves were on a steady climb. The Braves that year were very much like the Mets this year, where it was about like 100 games of them being the best team in baseball. Now those roles are reversed. And I feel like a lot of the narrative lately throughout this run has just been, oh, yeah, the Mets are going to fall out of it because it's the Braves. Like, of course the Braves are going to make it. And I get that. The Braves have earned that. At the same time, what we've watched for the past 4 months has not been the Braves being that team. The Mets have been, again, the best team in baseball. And I watched on Sunday the Braves try to give a game to your Marlins. I mean, if the Marlins got a single
Hey, they're
hit,
not mine.
sorry, I mean, okay, the Marlins, but still, like was it bases loaded, nobody out late in that game. I mean, there was so many opportunities for the Marlins to win that game. And then we're talking a 3-game lead going into this series. The Mets just beat Zach Wheeler on Sunday Night Baseball with Tyler McGill and Phil Maton covering the 6 innings there. Like, the Mets have something this year where I think they absolutely can go into Atlanta and win 2 of 3 and clinch this playoff spot. And even if they don't, if they just win 1, they still control their destiny in the final 3 games. I look at the Mets pitching, and game 1 it's going to be Severino versus Schwellenbach, and I think the Mets can win that game. And if it comes down to a rubber match, Sean Manaea versus Max Fried, this is where you guys can laugh at me. I honestly think the Mets have, if not an edge, a dead heat, because Sean Manaea has been unbelievable for 15, 16 starts now.
I'm not going to laugh at you.
No,
I
I'm not either.
will also say dead heat on that one. I don't think that Atlanta firmly has a starting pitching advantage in that game.
They have a huge one in game two. Huge one
Huge,
in game two.
Huge.
Chris Sale versus David Peterson. Now, I watched David Peterson a week ago go into Citizens Bank Park and match Christopher Sanchez and pitch into the eighth. So could David Peterson do it against a Braves lineup that has been anything but consistent? Absolutely. But again, Sean Manaea, halfway through the year, he watches Chris Sale, funny enough, dominate the Mets. And he goes, oh, I could maybe drop my arm slot and try to match him. Goes into the lab, says, oh, this feels really good. So he starts throwing from Chris Sale's arm slot, and he has pitched like Chris Sale for a couple months now. I mean, he's been ridiculous. He's pitching into the seventh inning every single time. His last start against the Phillies through 7 innings, faced 23 batters, retired 21 of them, gave up a couple home runs, but they weren't even bad pitches. Schwarber hit a sinker that was on the blackout side, went with it, hit it out to left field. Nick Castellanos, a changeup that was just off the plate. He, pulled it, hit it out. But, Sean Manaea has been so good. And the other thing he added too is a changeup that helps him against righties. That changeup, the one that Castellanos hit, funny enough. But it's just been remarkable to see what Sean Manaea has done, and getting ahead of myself. But when you get to free agency, Sean Manaea is going to be one of the top 3, 4 starting pitchers on the market with the season he's had. He's been really something this year.
That says something about the market. It also says something about Sean Manaea. I think it does say
Yeah.
a lot about the market because you've got,
Yeah.
like, all right, it's Burns, it's Freed, and then who, right? Like, I don't think there's really any other quote unquote frontline guy that's out there available. I do want to transition to wrap to the National League wildcard conversation as a whole. But before that, a grimace question because it has to happen. Um, we made fun of it. Like obviously it was funny and like the grimace vibe is great, but it kind of encapsulates what the Mets have done this year, where it's like, oh shit, like time to thank Grimace for what he did to my baseball team. This was not supposed to be a good year, and then Grimace showed up, and it's been awesome. Taking Grimace, pushing it somewhere else. If the season ended today, what letter grade would you give the New York Mets?
I mean, for this season, it's got to be an A. I mean, just to go from dead in the water at the end of May to in this race, the expectations have changed a little bit because now if they were to somehow collapse in the final 6 games, you'd have to drop that down a little bit. They have now earned the right to expect to be in the playoffs. But a month ago, if you told me they'd be in this position where they would be going into Atlanta with a chance to
Yep.
clinch, I'd say, what an unbelievable year. And I think moving forward, they definitely have a much better infrastructure to keep this up compared to 2022.
The other element of this, sorry, Arm, like real quick, the other element of this that makes me think A as well is not just because, hey, at the end of May, like we thought this team was dead in the water. In March, we were forecasting this team to be dead in the water because this was already branded as a rebuild year, which makes me
A
think that
bridge, a bridge year.
bridge year. Sorry, yeah. So you're not supposed to make the postseason in the bridge year. I think the Mets were pretty aware of that, yet their roster has proven to exceed that forecasted expectation for the New York Mets, which makes me think A. Arm, are you on A as well?
Yeah, 100% for the exact same reason. Like the fact that you have, leaders and people that are in charge here pretty much making it outwardly clear that the expectations are not that high for a team that still has one of the highest active payrolls in Major League Baseball. It was a weird faux pas in itself, and it's nice to see the team kind of overcome that and just kind of ignore it and say, hey, we have our own expectations and we're going to play to them. I think most of baseball media like ourselves kind of agreed that it did look like a bridge year, especially when you looked at the pitching rotation and things like that on paper. But like any year, things can go wrong for teams that you believe in, or it can go right for teams that you're a little skeptical of. And we laid them all out. Like it's hard to argue against what's happening with some of these arms. But my question too, because I think when you look at like the D-backs, I think it's pretty much what turned into what looked like a disappointing season now looks like kind of status quo for them. Maybe still slightly disappointing because being the reigning pennant winners, you'd think that they get closer to 90 wins at this point, but still 87. They could still get to that 90 threshold and make the playoffs. How important is it, or maybe not at all? I know this is something that knowing you think you've looked at this inside and out to grab that second wild card spot potentially, because as it sits now, Diamondbacks and the Mets are tied. for the same record for that second wild card spot. Does it make much of a difference seeding matchup? Anything like how much do you think the Mets really care about that, or is it really just fighting off the Braves at this point? The focus of just solidifying that final spot.
I think for them right now, it's pretty simple. Win a series in Atlanta, you have a spot. Then it gets interesting though, because I think playing the Brewers, I would much prefer that than the Padres.
Yeah.
So I actually think that
Yeah,
that
too.
sixth spot is probably the sweeter one to land in. So yeah, I'll let Jack kind of comment that. I also want to touch on the bridge here thing a little bit though, because I could push back on that a little bit, a little bit.
The
How
floor is
so?
yours.
Yeah,
I would
how
say go
so?
ahead.
How?
Because what happened was Max Scherzer said it was going to be a bridge year, and the media heard that after the trade deadline. The Mets, Steve Cohen, David Stearns, no one ever said bridge year. Trust me, I know. I cover every press conference every single day. I do an episode of Locked On Mets. They were pushing from the end of the season when Stearns took over that they were going to try to compete this year. Now, you could say they were just, saving face, saying whatever they wanted to, but they went out and they could have just not spent anything.
Yeah.
They could have made it a development year, said, all right, let's see what Mike Vassell does in the starting rotation to see if we have a starter. Let's just roll out the red carpet to Mark Vientos from day one. Let's not sign JD Martinez. They made moves in the offseason. And I think what David Stearns knows from his time in Milwaukee is any year you can have a chance and you let the baseball calendar dictate things. So they were never planning on being a bridge year. If they were out of it, they would have sold like crazy because that would have been the smart thing to do. But they did everything they could in the offseason. David Stearns made more transactions than anyone on minor league deals, all this stuff to just try to bring in depth to the organization to win this year. And the message from spring training was always 162 plus. Like Carlos Mendoza had that burned into my brain how much he said that every single day of spring training. We're getting the guys ready for 162 plus. 160. So like they did not go into this year just saying, we're just ready to think about 2025 and beyond. They did expect to win, just nobody else expected it.
Valid.
Interesting.
It's
Okay.
a valid counterpoint because it was not really put on record by any team officials. So Scherzer just kind of outing that. And even if it did look like a potential, and I think that's why the way the Mets looked at it, right? You sign JD Martinez. If you're not doing great, you can definitely flip him for a prospect at some point. Same story with Severino. But the other side of it is that's still a lot of money to invest into 1 year deals for guys. They went out, as you said, and go get a guy like Tyrone Taylor, which gives you some depth, and he's been huge for them too. So signing a Harrison Bader to a 1 year deal too. Like there's a lot of those 1 year invest into this team, give it a shot. So I'll hear that counterpoint, but I still think that even internally, I don't even know if the Mets expected a year like this, and I do think that Scherzer what he said was probably what was being echoed by the team, by the brass, but you can't fault them for that, for what they're talking about internally. They never came out and said that, which I Googled it. And yes, it never really came on record from anybody. And that's why I love having Fink on, because if anything is a little bit off with the Mets and what we say, we'll make sure that we
I'm
get it
I'm gonna
right.
come
Because
at you on it.
but
Yeah.
but that's why I love, because like you can only keep up so much with all 30 teams. That's why we always say like, hey, if we're a little bit off about like how this manager is perceived in the fan base or
Let
whatever,
us
like
know.
let us know in the comments. We can only be so tapped into everything. But I still am gonna run with the bridge year thing because I think it's really funny.
I think it's funny too. And you opened up the avenue for my Brewers pitching hate, which is awesome. I hadn't done that today, so I get to fire it off now. Um, I would much rather see the Brewers than the San Diego Padres. Even just look at the weekend. Savali, incredibly mid in his start. Colin Ray, incredibly average in his start. And then you go to the other side, and I know it was against the White Sox, but Joe Musgrove went scoreless. Yu Darvish was awesome. The fact that they have Musgrove and Darvish, and I'm looking at Savali and Ray elsewhere. If I'm the New York Mets, I would much rather see the winner of the NL Central than the top wildcard team. Last question for both of you guys before we go. As it stands right now, the National League wild card has San Diego sitting at the top spot. They're 3 games clear. Arizona is 87 and 69. The Mets are 87 and 69. The Braves are 2 back. How does this shake out? Can you stack the wild card for me?
Well, one thing too, the Mets are the tiebreaker over the Diamondbacks. So they're really sitting in the best spot of those three teams, and the Diamondbacks got to play the Padres to close out the year. So I'll know a lot more after this Mets versus Braves series for sure. I think that the Braves are going to be the odd team out. And I honestly think that the Mets will probably be squaring off against the Padres. I think the Diamondbacks are going to end up in that final spot. Um, but yeah, it's such an awesome week because the Padres play the Diamondbacks. Anything can happen. There's a world where the Padres, get worked by the Dodgers over the next couple days, and the Mets could end up in the top spot too, just because they
That's
have
a
the hardest
sneaky
week.
tough schedule, man. San Diego
Yeah.
gets the Dodgers and the Snakes this week. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure it's in LA and then in Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's all on the road too.
Mm.
that is a tough finish. And if the Braves are, or if the Mets are able to handle business against the Braves, what you close out against Milwaukee, is there any reason for those games to be that meaningful for Milwaukee?
If the Phillies like fall on their face, but probably not. I mean, at this point, the Brewers are kind of, I think they've even said like we're only going to pitch our guys 5 innings. I think they've pretty much accepted they're going to be in the wild card round hosting a series. So I don't think there's really anything for the Brewers to play for, other than the fact that you'll be playing the Mets, and if they end up like the Mets could just be staying there for a week, going right into a wild card series. I guess that's the only interesting element. You could have two extensions of the wild card round because it's Padres, D-backs, Mets, Brewers, and that could be what we see next week.
Good point. Problem is they would probably need to fly from Arizona to San Diego to do that. But I like
Yeah,
that where it's just like book 6 nights in Milwaukee. Why don't you?
yeah, yeah, pretty much.
I think the Pods still hold on to that top spot. I mean,
Yeah,
with the way everything's looked and how hot they are right now, it's going to be really fascinating to see how things shake out with the D-backs and the Mets. Moreno going down again, looking banged up is definitely unfortunate, and I think that's going to matter more than people think. I know that they've been playing really good ball without him, but I do think that's going to matter down the stretch and especially in the playoffs here. But I think there's a level of like the Mets in that Brave series are going to, I mean, that's going to be exhausting in truest. Like those 3 games, you take the 2 out of 3 and you put yourself pretty much, you clinch, you're good to go. I mean, it would 2 out of 3 would clinch it, right?
yeah.
I almost wonder if there's like an emotional like release that comes in somewhat of a meaningless series. I know you might want that spot or not, whatever it may be, and all of a sudden just Milwaukee, just being Milwaukee, can just kind of back into winning 2 out of those 3. I'll go D back. I think it holds as is. I think it holds as is because I think there's a very real scenario where the Braves take 2 out of 3, and it's not even an indictment on the Mets. I just think it's balls to the wall here, like empty the tank, and then the Mets could take care of business then on the back end there. Regardless, I think it holds the way it is now, which is pretty fun. I like the 30 teams that we've got going here, any which way.
You said the Mets have the tiebreaker over the D-backs?
Yeah, and the Padres as well.
Okay. I think the Padres hold on
Ooh,
to that top wild card spot. I go Padres, Mets, D-backs. So I think we get
Yeah.
Mets, Padres in San Diego, and then I think we get D-backs, Brewers in Milwaukee.
Do you guys think that we're going to be looking at Joe Musgrove's ears again? What do you
Yeah,
think?
definitely.
oh, no. That actually, I hope we get to run it back, Ben. I would love that. If I'm Musgrove, I would lather up my ears with the
Oh,
most
dude.
legal substance of all time. The like, I'll
This
get
is
it
Vaseline,
pre-approved.
right?
Yeah, and just I'm gonna just bait them into looking at my ears.
I hope so, man. The narratives, they write themselves. So,
Can you
Easy.
give me actually? I have one last thing. Sorry, Jack, for
No,
Fink
you're
before
good.
we go because we don't get it. It's we've had Fink on to talk about like depressing Mets, but I want to take advantage of happy Fink. This is nice.
No doubt.
Um, you said they can make a run. I don't disagree at all, given what the offense can do, and you have to assume healthy Lindor. The staff, like you just can't argue against it at this point. How important is Sanga coming back, if at all, to you? And is that factored in to the thought that they can make a run? And what do you, two-parter here, because I just thought about that as I was asking the question. What do you think it looks like if Sanga comes back? What are the chances of him coming back in general? And then, quick pitch on why the Mets can make a run.
so Senga, he pitched in Syracuse this weekend and had triceps tightness. So I
Oh,
just,
okay. No
yeah,
reason. No,
I
I didn't
feel like
see
it's
that.
done.
No
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. I mean, granted, if the Mets go on a really deep run, maybe, but I doubt it at this point. To me, I think one of the biggest things in the Mets' favor is watching Edwin Diaz against Philly the last
Yes.
couple of days. I mean, he
Yes.
looks like prime Edwin Diaz, and that's why you pay him over $100 million. He gets a 4-out save, then a 6-out save, and he went through top of the Phillies lineup in that eighth inning.
Huge.
He's at 30 pitches deep yesterday. He's throwing 101. So when you have Edwin Diaz back to that level, that gives you a chance in October. That's the way I view the Mets. And then I just think Sean Manaea can go up against anybody's ace now, the way he's pitching. Severino, he's definitely not as trusted of a number two as I'd like, but he's definitely good enough as well, and he pitches deep in games. And Peterson and Quintana are pretty solid as well. So like I think the Mets have enough pitching, and the reason why I think they can go on a run is I can just imagine so many different. The Mets are a really deep team when it comes to their position players. When you have Starling Marte's not even locked into an everyday role, you have a great defense altogether when you can
McNeil
run
should
out
be back too, right?
if they make a deep enough run. I would say probably not. It would be surprising if he came back in the NLDS. So it would have to be if they got further. But even without him, again, you have Acuna as the last man on your bench. You got an outfield where Tyrone Taylor, Harrison Bader give you defense. Nimmo is obviously the constant, and then you have Winker and Marte for some offensive pop. JD Martinez might have lost the starting spot where he might be a platoon DH now.
Wow.
Like that's how much he struggled. But again, when you can run out a lineup where Alvarez is batting eighth and all of a sudden he's found his swing and Mark Vientos can break a game open. We've been waiting for Pete Alonso to do something for a long time. Maybe he has some moments in October. I just think the Mets are a team that is really sort of built for a playoff run with the type of guys they have in their lineup with enough starting pitching and then the lockdown closer you need. So I think they got a shot for sure.
What's really unfortunate is whenever we have Fink on, we have a great time. So we have to keep having you on. Can you start inviting yourself on the pod more often? That was really
Yeah.
nice, where it's like you get the
Yeah.
Sunday evening text, and it's like, oh, you know what? Yes, you're on
Yeah.
tomorrow. Let's do
And
this.
I'll start doing that. Yeah, I'll start touching you guys more. Just please
well,
let me on your show so I can talk about my Mets again.
well, next time we'd love to have you on right when they get bounced. That would be
Okay. Yeah.
Like
I
10
can't
minutes
wait.
after the final out.
Yes, if they get swept by the Braves, I'll be back on
Oh, if they
Friday.
get swept by the Braves, we'll see you in a few days, baby. I'm gonna make sure of it. I'll come to your house. I live in Florida now. I'll find you.
Yeah,
We'll,
that's
we'll,
fine.
we'll
That's
go
fine.
live.
It'll be great. It'll be great. I would love to just embrace my misery with you guys. It'd be fantastic.
I appreciate you, my friend. And by the way, if you are not reading just baseball right now, if you are, this is one of the main mastermind behind it with a lot of other incredible minds putting it together to make this thing happen. But if you're not, go check out justbaseball.com. Fink is doing an incredible job at managing everything there and making sure that we are consistently putting out the best content for all 30 teams.
Yes.
All 30
Yeah.
teams. Fink does not really talk much about the Mets on the site nearly as much as you'd think. It's all 30 and really proud of the coverage we've got there. And this guy's the reason behind that.
He is phenomenal. Every link you need is in the episode description, including Fink's X handle.
Oof.
That's going to be in there today. Really exciting
Wow,
stuff.
exciting.
Yeah, you
I
might
know,
get three
right?
followers.
Looking forward to that, man.
And, I think it'll be Peter and I that are talking to you tomorrow. See you guys.